If you're someone who regularly experiences nightmares or have panic attacks, or if you jump easily at loud noises, or you just feel this sense like you really have a hard time feeling relaxed in your body, any form of really intense or consistent anxiety, then there's a good chance that you have PTSD. So my name is Jack, and I have survived and overcome PTSD, and over the past 5 years, my whole life has been about figuring out how to heal the trauma that caused my PTSD. And I have healed my PTSD to the point of now no longer experiencing the majority of my symptoms. The symptoms that I do experience are mild to the point where I'm not bothered by them anymore, and I can manage them, and they continue to improve as I do more and more self-care and healing work. So in this video, I'm going to be explaining the path that I took to understanding and healing my PTSD over the past 5 years. So basically, post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, happens as a result of an event that overwhelms us to the point that we can't process it in the moment that it happens. And so it's not the experience that causes the trauma, it's our interpretation of that experience because we haven't processed that experience. And in trauma, we say too much, too fast, too soon. And that's what causes this overwhelm response from our nervous system. So usually this happens when the emotions of the experience are really strong, or there's so much fear that we go into shock. Basically, the nervous system and the brain can't actually cope or comprehend what has happened. And usually when we feel angry or sad or afraid, we can process those emotions. We feel them fully, we get to a sense of completion, and then we move on. But with trauma, time is frozen because we don't finish completing our response to that experience. And that's why over time we start to develop symptoms. So whether it's nightmares or flashbacks or panic attacks, whatever form of intense overwhelm or reliving of that experience, that's that experience trying to complete its processing in our brain. Or rather, that's our brain trying to finish processing that experience. And one of the other things that happens that you might be familiar with if you're dealing with PTSD is that it causes us a lot of stress. And that stress ends up bringing up our symptoms because when our nervous system gets activated, that's when our emotions come up, that's when our fear responses happen. And so it kind of creates this circular cycle where we get triggered, it causes stress, and then the stress causes us to get triggered more easily. And having dealt with this, it's just exhausting. When I had PTSD, I wasn't sleeping well, I was exhausted all the time, and I was constantly getting triggered. And so my stress was so high. And if you're dealing with PTSD, you might be able to relate. And if that's the case, I'm sorry. And I also trust that there is a path to healing. I've healed. A lot of the people who are my clients have healed through their trauma, and those with PTSD, we've really improved what they've been dealing with, and their symptoms have gotten better. So healing is possible. It's just about understanding how to go through the healing process, which I'm about to explain to you. So first, I'll just explain briefly what the main traumas were that I experienced that resulted in me having PTSD. There were 3. The first was being attacked by an ex-partner of mine. That was by far the main and most intense trauma that I experienced. That started to show up in my dreams as nightmares of someone wanting to come towards me to attack me. I was having these fear sensations that every time a door opened or I went around a corner or an elevator door opened, that there would be this demon coming at me and attacking me. I had tons of paranoia. And basically this experience of being attacked broke my sense of trust with the world. And I was just constantly living as if this was going to happen again because I didn't come to a sense of safety, of completion, when the original trauma happened, when I was attacked. I was also in a car accident where a friend backed up and we smashed into another vehicle, and that really made me feel afraid in vehicles moving forward. And then I had a few other things happen. I had a car battery basically explode, not fully explode, but a lot of sparks and electricity jumping all around, and that really freaked me out as well. And so with each of these traumas, there was a sense of like, my sense of trust was taken away from me, and I was afraid of for my own safety. And this is what you can probably relate to as well, where you had your sense of trust taken away, or you were deeply afraid when the trauma happened, or you're deeply afraid that whatever happened will happen again. Now, of course, there's other emotions like shame and sadness that we might have felt or might be feeling as a result of the trauma, but often fear is, when we're talking about PTSD, fear is the most intense emotion. And then what happens is we continue to live as if this is still happening, or that we're afraid it's going to happen again. And that, again, is part of the symptoms that we experience. So now I'm going to talk about how I got to a sense of completion, how I changed my perception of these traumatic events so that I no longer experience them on a regular basis, or symptoms that represent those experiences. So one of the goals of healing trauma is learning to tell a different story than the one that we continue to live. So, for example, the story originally might be, I was attacked and now I'm unsafe and I could be attacked at any time. And the new story that I've learned to tell myself is, I was attacked once and that hasn't happened again, and I can trust that it's very unlikely that that will happen and that I'm safe. And for your trauma, it might be a totally different story, but the goal is to learn to tell these stories and to teach our nervous system to believe them. And this isn't just about affirmations or talking to ourselves. It's actually about creating a felt experience, a feeling sense in our body of what it's like to not be triggered, to not be afraid. And what starts to happen as we heal and tell a different story about the trauma is we're no longer triggered by these experiences when we think of them or when we're reminded of them. We've learned to believe and to feel the different story. And often that's a story that we are safe and that we're in control of our experience. So as I reflect back on my experience of healing trauma, there's basically 3 phases that I went through in order to heal. The first stage is creating safety and self-regulation. And basically what this means is that we're learning to create a sense of feeling safe and in control in our bodies. And this is helpful because when we get triggered, if we have a good capacity to come back into the feeling of safety, then we're going to spend less time being triggered, and we're not going to spend as much of our time in a fight or flight or a stress response when we get triggered. And the other part of this is self-regulation, and it's increasing our capacity to handle stress. We're able to regulate our emotions, to regulate our anxiety, and to come back into this calm, rest and digest state when we get stressed or triggered. So one of the main tools that I used in phase 1 for myself was TRE, or tension release exercise, sometimes known as trauma release exercise. And this is a shaking exercise that helps to release somatic tension that's stored in the body that causes us to feel anxious and to be triggered. And as we release more and more tension, we're able to relax more. I'll eventually make a video on this, and if that's not linked, I'll have another video linked in the description from someone I trust, from a video that's good, so that you can start doing this practice of shaking to release tension. The second tool that I would offer that was really helpful for me, and still is all the way in phase 3, is deep breathing. And what this is placing a hand on your low belly and maybe also on your heart, and just taking nice, deep, slow breaths in. And especially when we breathe into the low belly, it makes us feel safe. I have a tool called the safety response that you can access for free that I'll link in the description of this video that I basically use anytime I get triggered. Exercise can also be helpful in phase 1. You want to be careful about doing super intense exercise because that can bring up stress and can bring up the trauma. It's better, I've found, to do lower intensity exercise, such as going for a run or going walking, and doing it on a regular basis so that we can reduce the amount of stress in our body. Supplements can also be helpful during phase 1. They can be helpful during all the phases, but especially when we're just trying to not be so stressed and anxious all the time. Supplements like magnesium threonate was one that I found really helpful. I would take it pretty much every day, and it would help me to have nightmares less often. This was a recommendation that I got from Andrew Huberman's podcast. I think maybe from Tim Ferriss as well, but I think Huberman said use magnesium threonate, and I found that after about a week or 2, that's when I started to sleep more and feel more relaxed in my body. The downside of magnesium threonate is that I didn't dream as much. It was helpful for getting me to maybe like 60 or 70% of the sleep quality that I wanted, but eventually I stopped taking it because it was interfering with getting to a really deep level of sleep. So instead, it was just helping me get some sleep. There's one more tool or type of tool that I'll talk about for phase 1 here, and that's vagal toning. The vagus nerve is a large nerve that connects all of your main internal organs together, and basically when it's toned or in good shape, it helps you to relax more easily. And there's a bunch of different things that you can do to improve your vagal tone, such as singing and humming, doing yoga, all these different tools. And I'll link a video below that basically where I explain how to improve your vagal tone. That's something that helps us to improve our body's response to stress. And basically we want to do whatever tools are helpful here in phase 1 to help us to learn to feel safe and create an inner sense of safety, and to improve our response to stress enough so that we can go into phase 2 without getting overwhelmed or super triggered. And this is not a hard and fast rule. This is just what I found helpful, is that the more time I spent doing deep breathing, releasing tension in my body, and improving my vagal tone, the better I was able to go into my trauma, which is what I'll talk about in phase 2. So phase 1 is really about setup. Phase 2 is about getting into the healing itself. And this is where we're releasing emotions from the past and where we're actually starting to heal and reparent our memories where the trauma happened. And again, if you're getting super triggered when you try to feel your emotions or go into your trauma, then you just want to keep working to build a sense of safety. And there may be other tools that you want to explore, such as working with a therapist or doing other forms of nervous system regulation, which I'll talk about in a future video. If you really struggle to even talk about your trauma, that means you're probably still in phase 1 because you're getting so triggered when you think about or even talk about these memories. So a good sort of test for if you're ready for phase 2 is if you're able to talk about your trauma and not get super anxious and or go into a panic attack or get overwhelmed. That means you're probably ready to start exploring some healing of the actual memories or emotions related to them. And again, this goes back to that sense of completion that we want to create around these past experiences and the emotions related to them. So when we're talking about emotional release, what we really want to do is make the space to feel what it wasn't safe to feel when the trauma happened. And often this is where anxiety starts, is when it's not safe to feel an emotion. And what you'll find is that as you get better at letting your anger out, letting your sadness out, feeling the shame, just letting it all be actually processed by your body rather than held in and creating this tension that results in anxiety, you basically start to feel your emotions more and more, and then you become more relaxed in your body because you're in the present moment. You're not trying to avoid all of these emotions from your past. So one really good tool for emotional release that I use all the time is breathwork. There's videos on my channel, which one of them I'll link below or here on the screen, that guides you through breathwork. You just need to be aware that there's a whole bunch of different kinds of breathwork, and it can be intense. So you want to be really careful, especially when you do breathwork for the first time. It's nice to have someone there just in case you start to feel overwhelmed. And then they can support you, put a hand on your shoulder, and have a conversation with you to help you to calm down. So some other things that I found really helpful during phase 2 are processes of adjusting the memories that we have of the trauma. And we want to feel really safe to do this. Often I would do it with a therapist or a coach. But basically it's the work of going into the memories and noticing what we can change about the memories. So there's a technique called somatic experiencing that's really helpful here, where we're actually noticing what can we experience, what can we feel or notice about the memory that's different than the story that we've been telling. Because what we start to do then is create another option other than the fear response that we've been conditioned into. This is a bit of an advanced technique. That's why it's good to do it with a practitioner. What I found in my experience was that rather than jumping straight into the fear or the shame or certain things happening, I could start to create a new story about my experience, and I could start to feel and process parts of the experience that before I wasn't able to. And as I did this, I just realized I could actually feel safe as I thought about my trauma. This might take a lot of repetition. It might take a few different sessions or different types of reparenting, but somatic experiencing is a really good format that I would recommend you seek out, especially if you have severe trauma. So, one thing that I want to mention here is that we don't always have to process the actual memories related to the trauma. Sometimes we can just think about something that is similar to the trauma, like being in a room with the person who attacked us, versus being in the actual full memory or the room where we were attacked. And this is a lot of visualization work. So you will find with time what allows you to cognitively represent the memory or the emotions around it enough to process it. For me, I find it most effective to fully go into the memory and to start to change parts of the memory or to interact with the person who was part of the trauma or with myself. And I might even imagine a different set of events happening, ones where I was in control. Because if my nervous system internalizes that I was in control, then it can let go of the fear of having not been in control. So phase 2 is a lot of trial and error. There's no perfect answer on how to do this. But again, it goes back to teaching the nervous system a different story of what happened. One final piece here on phase 2 is that you want to feel really resourced or supported as you go into your memories and your emotions. So it can be helpful to think about people who you love or memories of really safe places before you do this work so that you start to feel more relaxed. Because if you just try to jump in and you're already kind of stressed out or anxious, it can make it worse. Like you can end up re-traumatizing yourself because you just relive the same fear because you don't feel empowered enough to go in and change those memories. And again, this is why it's good to do the phase 2 stuff with a facilitator like myself or another trauma healer who has experience with actually healing trauma. Now let's talk about phase 3. Phase 3 is about maintenance and detailing. And usually you know that you've gotten to phase 3 because you're getting triggered a lot less often. You don't feel overwhelmed very often. You just feel this sense of like, I'm starting to feel relaxed in my body. And there might still be things that trigger you, things that feel stressful, but you just get so much better at dealing with them. So for me right now, like if I get anxious from seeing something stressful on social media or getting a message from someone that stresses me out, usually within like 5 minutes or less, that stress is gone because I know how to breathe deeply and there isn't a lot of unprocessed fear or shame in me that I then start to feel and get overwhelmed by. And really this just comes from doing a lot of the stuff in phase 2 and phase 1. It's just practice and consistency and teaching your nervous system that a different story is true than you being that overwhelmed, triggerable person. So in phase 3, you might be going into trauma that was less intense for you, but is still kind of affecting how you relate to the world, how you show up in your day to day. And it's just continuing to clear those blockages, those barriers, those emotions that are causing you to not be able to fully be present in the present moment. So it can be repeating more somatic experiencing, more reparenting of your past memories. Again, it's a lot of trial and error when we're healing trauma. The other thing that's been really helpful for me in phase 3 is just having a daily practice of gentle, conscious, connected breath work. Again, I have some guided sessions on conscious, connected breath work, so you can practice doing that with me using the link in the description of this video. Ultimately, it's just about continuing to take care of yourself when you're in phase 3, because you're building this momentum of feeling safe. And as you continue to feel more safe and empowered, you're in a stronger place, you can do more healing, you have more energy to invest in your self-care, and it's sort of like a snowball. It's like just this positive reinforcing loop. Now, one of the tools that's relevant to phase 2 and 3 is clearing somatic tension. Once you're in phase 3, you get really good at knowing, oh, I got triggered, or oh, I don't feel in control, and being able to pinpoint the pattern of what you experienced, and then realizing, oh, there's probably a memory there that I'm reliving or some kind of unprocessed emotion that I'm projecting onto this moment. And then basically you can just go and self-facilitate or occasionally work with a therapist or a facilitator to then go and hit that direct spot. Because when you're in phase 1, it's hard to have a grasp of where all this stuff is coming from. Phase 2, you work through a lot of the major pieces. And then in phase 3, you just get it. You're like, oh yeah, like all of this stuff is related. Here's where this emotion comes from. Here's where this behavior comes from, this defense mechanism. And you just become sort of like a wizard. You can self-facilitate, you know the maps really well, and you understand your body and what helps you to heal. So I'll just talk briefly about what it's been like since I pretty much healed my PTSD. I feel a lot more relaxed in my body. I feel like I can trust my sense of the world a lot more. One of the biggest things was just being able to sleep through the night without having nightmares. That was like a huge change. And of course, when we sleep better, our mental health improves. So for me, this has just been huge. I've been able to start working out in a lot more intense ways and not feel overwhelmed by the acute stress that those workouts cause. And I just feel this sense of deep trust towards the world and towards myself and other people. One thing that I'll just say is like when we're traumatized, it can feel like it's never going to end. It can just feel like night after night, it's just PTSD and we just want to escape this fear, this distraught feeling in our body. And for me, it almost was like a miracle when I started to feel so relaxed again. And I just want to say that like if it feels like it's not going to end, keep going, be persistent, and just trust that you can heal. Because ultimately, when you choose to start believing that healing is possible and that you are going to heal, that's when the most healing starts, is when we sort of have this belief of what's going to happen or what can happen. And that was really true for myself. So one final piece that I'll share here is that as you're healing, it's not going to always feel like you're going on like an upwards path and just feeling better all the time. For me, there were times where for a couple of months, I'd feel really good. And then I'd go and like have a couple drinks of alcohol and just totally go back down. And it would then take, less time to feel better, but I'd still feel really dysregulated and anxious. Sometimes I would just have nightmares, even if nothing prompted them. And so it takes time, and you just have to accept that there sometimes will be these regressions where the trauma comes back up. And just to keep working and trusting that the more you do this, you will heal and your nervous system will recover from the trauma. That's pretty much all I have to share. I'm going to start to wrap up now. There's a lot more that I could share, but I just don't want this video to be too long. And if you want to learn more about healing trauma and the path that I took, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel and like this video so that the algorithm gives you more videos like it. I'm going to start making videos on a more regular basis and really try to give a lot of detail like I've done in this video. So hopefully this has been helpful. If it is, I encourage you to check out my website, my courses, and to ask any questions that you might have. So feel free to make a comment or reach out through my website. So I really hope this has been helpful, and thank you so much for watching this video. I wish you the best with your healing.